Hello and welcome to another edition of our World Panorama, a show that keeps you up to date with all the latest news from the globe, developments that are changing our world, our future. I'm Aishwarya with you. First, let's take a look at the headlines. World's most valuable oil company seeks to diversify. Saudi Aramco launches long-awaited IPO with a target of $2 trillion. Iran resumes uranium enrichment at its underground Fordo facility, fourth such step taken by Iran in response to sanctions reinstated by US President Donald Trump after abandoning 2015 nuclear deal last year. No breakthrough in US-China trade war after Chinese Commerce Ministry says two countries agreed to cancel tariffs in phases. President Donald Trump refutes, insists he had yet to agree to start reducing tariffs on imports from Beijing. Bolivia racked by biggest protests in decades since President Morales' controversial re-election amid accusations of vote rigging. Top opposition leader arrives in capital demanding president's resignation. And a third consecutive week of anti-government protests over political corruption and economic trouble in Lebanon. After resignation of Prime Minister Hariri, protesters say government as a whole needs to go. More than 3 years after the IPO was first mooted, world's largest oil producer, Saudi Arabia's Aramco, announced its intention to float, the most dramatic change to the Saudi oil industry since the company was nationalized in the 1970s. The IPO is a cornerstone of Prince Mohammed's Vision 2030 plan to make the Saudi economy ready for the post-oil era. The state-owned oil company is poised to determine its final launch price over the coming weeks. If Saudi Aramco achieves a valuation of $1.5 trillion, it will far exceed the market capitalization of Apple. And Saudi Arabia is pulling out all the stops to ensure the success of Aramco's initial public offering.
عن حصول أرامكو السعودية.
I'm glad to announce that Aramco has got the approval from the Capital Market Authority for IPO in the Saudi market.
لتصبح شركة مدرجة.
It's official. Saudi Aramco will float shares on the Riyadh Stock Exchange this week. The first publicly listed shares of Saudi Arabia's state-owned oil company will be up for sale in early December. The company is hoping to raise $100 billion on a $2 trillion valuation in what is projected to be the largest ever initial public offering.
मुझे लगता है कि IPO लेने का ये मकसद होगा कि इसका कैपिटल बेस जो है ना, अभी लगता है कि $1 ट्रिलियन का बड़ा कंपनी है. इससे बड़ा ऑयल कंपनी दुनिया में नहीं है अभी. तो इस ऑयल कंपनी का और बहुत बढ़ाना है. इसके लिए मेरे ख्याल से IPO लेके आ रहे हैं.
Experts call the Aramco IPO an industry-defining event. That is because the Saudi Arabia state oil monopoly makes more money than any other company on earth. They cite the fact that Aramco is the most profitable business in the world with an oil reserve life of 52 years. Further, Aramco's oil reserves are the cheapest to extract. Aramco posted a $68 billion profit for the first 9 months of 2019, a slowdown from the previous year when annual earnings totaled $111 billion. Experts believe that investors would be interested in a monster oil company like Aramco because of its scale, profitability and shareholder dividends. It is the largest and lowest cost producer of oil, and the scale of spare capacity still makes it uniquely strategic in the global oil market. And if Saudi Aramco achieves a valuation of $2 trillion or even $1.5 trillion next month, it will far exceed the market capitalization of USS Apple.
करीबन कोई 10 मिलियन से भी ज़्यादा इसका तेल प्रोडक्शन और जो क्रूड प्रोडक्शन है वो भी 13 मिलियन टन से ज़्यादा वो प्रोड्यूस करती है। तो हर एक जगह पे प्रेजेंस जो है, जो आंकड़े हैं वो ये बताते हैं कि कंपनी का जो सिग्निफिकेंस है वो बहुत हाई है।
With uncertainty over valuation for Aramco, the next few weeks could be tumultuous. The biggest risks are tied to Aramco's core business, oil. Demand growth for crude is slowing. Growing pressure on institutional investors to ditch oil assets they already own, as well as a tough political environment in the Middle East, and the investment case for Aramco weakens. Skeptics say the climate crisis and geopolitical risks could deter investors from buying into the partial privatization of Saudi Aramco. At the moment, it, however, is exciting. Basically, the US has Apple, Saudi has Aramco. It is going to be interesting to see how the company grows over time. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Iran this week began injecting gas into centrifuges at its Fordo nuclear facility, rolling back another commitment under the 2015 nuclear deal. The measure on Wednesday is the fourth step announced by Iran since it began responding to Washington's abandonment of the nuclear deal. With restarting of its nuclear enrichment program, Iran is hoping to pressure the US into lifting its sanctions that it reimposed on the country in 2018. France, Britain, Germany and Russia have called Iran's latest move as grave, saying that it signaled Iran's intent for the first time to leave the deal.
Iran distancing itself from the 2015 nuclear deal that it had signed with the world powers. This as it began fueling 1,044 centrifuges at its Fordo nuclear facility on Thursday, injecting uranium gas into them. President Hassan Rouhani announced the move on Wednesday. With this, Fordo moved from its permitted status of research plant to an active nuclear site.
Today, we would like to declare commencement of the fourth step of reducing Iran's commitments under the JCPOA.
However, the regime already had been openly violating the nuclear deal for months, enriching uranium at higher concentrations and storing more of it. In fact, this was the fourth step taken by Iran since July in response to US sanctions reinstated by President Donald Trump. On Monday, Iran announced it had doubled its operation of advanced IR-6 centrifuges that can produce enriched uranium 10 times faster than the first-generation IR-1s allowed under the accord.
Our enrichment capacity has been 6,000 operational SWU in terms of enrichment units. Now 2,660 SWU has been added to that number. It means something around 45 to 46% increase. This has happened within 2 months.
However, President Rouhani said the latest step was reversible if world powers party to the accord upheld their commitments. He also gave his European partners another 2-month deadline to protect Iran's economy from the crippling US sanctions. Iran's latest move was condemned by signatories of the accord, France, Britain and Germany. Russia blamed the situation on the US, which pulled out of the pact.
Now, for us, the next few weeks will be dedicated to increasing pressure from everyone for Iran to return to JCPOA agreement, and this must also be accompanied by the reduction of some sanctions on Iran.
Соединенные Штаты не просто разорвали свои собственные обязательства.
We will continue to seek the observance of the obligations of the nuclear accord. We are addressing this call to action to Iran, although we are well aware why Tehran is cutting back on its commitments.
Запретили всем остальным странам мира выполнять этот совместный всеобъемлющий план действий.
Under the 2015 nuclear accord, Iran agreed to limit its sensitive nuclear activities and allow in international inspectors in return for the lifting of crippling economic sanctions. However, President Trump abandoned the accord last year and re-imposed sanctions. The other parties to the deal, the UK, France, Germany, China and Russia, have tried to keep it alive. But the sanctions have caused Iran's oil exports to collapse and the value of its currency to plummet and sent its inflation rate soaring. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Hopes were raised this week of an early end to the US-China trade war. The Chinese Commerce Ministry announced on Thursday that the two countries had agreed to cancel the tariffs in phases. However, those hopes were dashed after US President Donald Trump said on Friday that he had yet to agree to start reducing tariffs on imports from America's rival. Donald Trump said there was not a deal in place to reduce any levies on Chinese goods. White House officials also say that more work needs to be done before the two presidents can meet to sign a deal. Progress has been reported in trade talks between Beijing and Washington. The two sides agreeing to reduce some punitive tariffs on each other's goods. Negotiators say that if talks progress, this will be followed by a complete rollback of tariff hikes.
Over the past 2 weeks, the chief trade negotiation on the two sides had serious and constructive decisions on how to properly resolve the respective core corners and agreed to cancel the added tariffs by stages. It is favorable for the economies of both China and the United States.
Governments of the two biggest global economies have raised tariffs on billions of dollars of each other's goods in fight over China's trade surplus and technology ambitions. However, a latest United Nations study shows that the trade war has hurt both the nations. It has cut US imports of Chinese goods by more than a quarter or $35 billion in the first half of this year and also drove up prices for American consumers. Additionally, the trade war weighs on trade worldwide and threatens to depress global economic growth that is already showing signs of slowing.
What we find is that, at least in the initial phase of the trade war, most of the cost of the tariffs has been passed down to U.S. consumers or firms. However, what we also find is that in the very last quarter, of the analysis, which is Q2 2019, we see that the Chinese export prices are becoming lower for products which are subject to tariff.
However, the sign of progress in trade talks helped to ease financial market jitters, lifting Wall Street to record highs. But the rally did not carry over to Asia. US President Donald Trump had first announced last month that the countries had reached a Phase 1 agreement on trade. Trump hinted that he and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping would sign that preliminary agreement at an economic summit in Chile this month. But the summit was cancelled because of an ongoing political crisis and violent protests in the planned host country. The two sides, US and China, are now looking into a new location for a signing ceremony. The trade talks have missed multiple deadlines since Trump and Xi launched them 11 months ago over a dinner in Buenos Aires. So while the Chinese Commerce Ministry statement lifted hopes that a partial deal may finally be coming into sight, observers have counselled caution, saying that there are still major disagreements between the two sides over technology and other irritants. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. And in World Panorama, we'll take a very short break here. And after the break, we'll tell you about the anti-government demonstrations in Lebanon that have flared up again. All the details on Lebanon unrest on the other side of the break. Stay tuned. Welcome back after the break. Unrest in Bolivia shows no sign of slowing down. Violent clashes between pro- and anti-government protesters have taken place amid calls for President Evo Morales to step down. Morales claimed victory in last month's election. However, opposition and protesters say that the election results were rigged. As Bolivians await the result of an international audit of the poll due this month, divisions in the country are deepening.
Flashback to 20th of October, which saw peaceful presidential elections in Bolivia. But ever since that night, tensions have been running high in the country. This after the results count was inexplicably paused for 24 hours. The suspension prompted suspicion among the supporters of opposition candidate Carlos Mesa that the result had been rigged to allow President Evo Morales, who has been in power since 2006, to stay on for another 5 years. The final result gave Morales just over the 10 percentage point lead he needed to win outright in the presidential election. Since then, there have been protests and strikes in the country. This week, protests turned violent, leaving 3 people dead, and a sizable segment of the armed forces warned that they would not crack down on demonstrators on behalf of President Evo Morales. Supporters of Morales and opposition have squared off in La Paz and other cities. Morales says opposition is trying to stage a coup.
When the opposition can't win the elections, they come up with a fraud. Now we see that it's not fraud but a coup defeat.
The opposition meanwhile is keeping up the pressure. A protest leader, Luis Fernando Camacho, who has become a symbol of opposition to President Morales, arrived on Wednesday in the nation's capital La Paz, where he planned to give Morales a pre-written resignation letter to sign. Camacho was whisked away in a convoy from the city's airport in the midst of huge security presence.
What we want is for peace to return to our country, for peace to return to our nation, for hatred, confrontation and racism among Bolivians to be set aside.
Carlos Mesa, the runner-up in the October election, had been at the airport waiting for Camacho to arrive. The attempt fanning tensions following weeks of protests.
Es una decisión que respetamos profundamente, tiene que ver con el Comité Cívico Pro Santa Cruz.
I and Camacho agree on a point that President Morales must leave the government. We believe that he must do so through a new election, but we deeply respect the decision that Camacho has taken to present a resignation letter to Morales to sign.
Nuestra línea es el presidente tiene que irse democráticamente a través del voto popular y nosotros hemos propuesto una nueva elección.
Hostilities have ramped up. The election observers from the Organization of American States have expressed their concerns. An audit by the body is currently underway. However, the opposition has already rejected the audit. As the impasse over who gets to govern the country devolves into broader violence, Bolivia's young democracy is facing a pivotal test. Bureau Report, Rajasabha TV.
And here is a look at some more international news stories in Global Buzz. Pakistan's opposition leaders, led by firebrand cleric cum politician Maulana Fazlur Rahman on Thursday, gave Prime Minister Imran Khan a 48-hour ultimatum to resign, saying that the massive anti-government protests will take a new direction after 2 days. The Jamaat-ul-Islam Fazl leader is leading the massive protest Azadi March, which entered the 7th day on Thursday, demanding Prime Minister Imran Khan's resignation, accusing him of rigging the 2018 general elections. The opposition parties, including the Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz and the Pakistan People's Party, have thrown their weight behind the massive anti-government rallies in Islamabad. Australian authorities say that an unprecedented number of emergency-level bushfires are threatening the state of New South Wales. More than 90 blazes were raging across the state on Friday. Gutsy winds and heat wave have exacerbated the fires, many of which are in drought-affected areas. There are reports of people trapped in their homes in several places, with the crew unable to reach them due to strength of the fires. Authorities have deployed more than 1,000 firefighters and 70 aircraft to save as many people as possible. Authorities in the state warn that many fires will continue to burn unless there is more rain. A Hong Kong student died after falling during protests on Monday, sparking impromptu protests and vigils from pro-democracy activists. Alex Chow fell from the edge of a car park during a police operation to clear the area on Monday morning. The exact circumstances of his fall are unclear, but reports say that he was trying to get away from the tear gas. Chow had been in coma since Monday and was certified dead early on Friday. The 22-year-old's death came after another week of political violence in Hong Kong. The United States has announced the increase of H-1B work visa application fee by $10 as part of its revised selection process. The U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services said that the non-refundable fee will support the new electronic registration system to make the H-1B CAP selection process more efficient for both petitioners and the federal agency. The H-1B program allows companies in the United States to temporarily employ foreign workers in occupations that require the application of a body of highly specialized knowledge. Lebanon is wrestling with its third consecutive week of anti-government protests. Mass demonstrations have crippled Beirut and other cities since mid of October as citizens call for a change in a country embroiled in political corruption and economic trouble. Prime Minister Saad Hariri has been blamed for bringing the country to the verge of bankruptcy. He resigned on 29th of October, weeks after the outrage boiled over. While his resignation met a key demand of protesters, though it hasn't been enough. The demonstrations have continued and protesters have now set their sight on the government as a whole, seeking to hold the political elite accountable for the financial crisis.
Women protesters with candles marching to the government headquarters in the Lebanese capital on Wednesday. The protest coming despite Saad al-Hariri resigning as country's prime minister last week. The protesters are demanding the whole government resigns. I want to tell the government that if you have an ounce of respect or love for the Lebanese people, then resign. Clean your names and leave. The country doesn't want you. Earlier on Tuesday, hundreds of students in Lebanon left schools and universities refusing to attend classes and joined anti-government protests. We want to stress that students are a huge part of the protest movement and they are the future of this country. There has been no progress regarding talks to appoint a new prime minister, and this is what has made them come out to the streets. Hundreds of thousands of Lebanese have taken to the streets since massive demonstrations broke out on 17th of October after the government announced a fee on internet calls and rise in the value-added tax. The protesters demanded politicians be held accountable for decades of economic mismanagement and alleged corruption. Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri announced his resignation 13 days later, but was asked to stay on in a caretaker capacity. But days later, President On has not yet set in motion the process of selecting a new Prime Minister in consultation with the Parliament, fueling a sense among protesters that politicians are continuing business as usual. As a result, nationwide protests continue. In the capital Beirut, university students blocked traffic. In addition to schools and universities, a range of public institutions were also targeted. Things have been accumulating inside us for a long time, and there wasn't a proper channel to let it out. We have always said they won't go out. The people are asleep. No one will move. So when this movement started, I felt like it was truly the chance. Unlike many Arab countries, Lebanon is not dominated by one strong ruler, but has a number of leaders and parties with sway over the country's various sectarian groups. Political leaders, including Hariri, have been holding closed-door discussions over a new government, but there is no sign of a quick breakthrough. Protesters are demanding a complete government overhaul, and experts say if further economic deterioration happens, it would exacerbate social tensions. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And finally, on 9th of November, that is today, Germany marks 30 years since the fall of the Berlin Wall. For generations, the imposing structure that divided the communist East and the capital West stood as a concrete symbol of the ideological divide that spanned Europe. So take a look at the visuals of that historic event when euphoric Germans clambered on top of the wall on 9th of November 1989, smashing it with hammers to break it up. And also take a look at the East Side Gallery, a section of the wall that artists painted in 1990 and which still stands. I'll take your leave now. Bye-bye.